Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Kuiper Labs. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the types of microorganisms. So firstly, we're going to introduce what we mean by this term microorganisms, and then we're going to go through the four main types of microorganisms that interest us as scientists: bacteria, fungi, protists, and viruses. So firstly, what do we mean by microorganisms? What are they? Essentially, microorganisms are those organisms that are only visible using a microscope. The micro in the name implies about the size that we're talking. Okay, that they're really, really small, typically only a single cell, so most of them are unicellular, which is the scientific word for one cell. And so we also call them microbes as a kind of a nickname, or microbes for short. All right, so that anything that is so small that you need some form of microscope in order to see it. So one of the first types of microorganisms, and one of the most common, is called bacteria, or bacterium is the singular. Now, bacteria are very numerous. They live on you, they live inside you at the moment, and most of them are perfectly healthy, and they can actually be very beneficial for you. They can do lots of positive things. But bacteria are unicellular organisms that have a very simple cell structure. We call them prokaryotes. It's kind of a scientific word for this really simple cell. You can see a bit of a diagram of a typical kind of bacterium here. There's no nucleus. The genetic information, the code which makes it unique, is just kind of coiled up in the middle there. There's no little central structure to keep it contained. We've got a range of other different kind of organelles and some layers to keep it safe. It also has this thing at the end here called a flagellum, which is Latin for whip, because it's basically a little tail that it whips backwards and forwards like an outboard motor to propel the bacterium forward. Now, not all bacteria would have this, but here's just an example of what that might look like. Okay, so in terms of some examples of bacteria you may have heard of, so E. coli is one, the one that you can see over here. Staphylococcus aureus, which is golden staph, is another one over here. Both of those are really nasty bacteria, can be very dangerous and lethal. You know, E. coli coming from food poisoning. Golden staph is a type of bacteria that lives on your skin naturally, but if you have surgery or you get a cut, that occasionally that can actually get into you, and it can make you very sick and even die if you get particularly bad. So there's some bad examples, but there's also plenty of other positive examples of bacteria that have great uses for us. You know, bacteria turn milk and cream into yogurt or cheese, for example, that they can be really helpful. So they're not all bad. The next type of microorganisms are fungi, or fungus is the singular. Okay, so fungi is it's a whole kingdom to itself. So remember, you know, we're talking about animals and plants, Monera, protists, and fungi. So fungi can be either unicellular or multicellular. We're going to focus on the unicellular kind of microorganism aspect of it now, but for example, mushrooms are an example of multicellular fungi. So you've kind of got to keep that in mind, that we're not only talking about microscopic organisms here. So fungi can be grouped into molds, yeasts, and mushrooms. They're kind of three broad kind of areas that have various different kind of uses and features. So thrush, for example, is an example of a fungus that causes an unpleasant kind of condition. Or another one, which is baker's yeast, a personal favourite of mine as someone who likes to make pizza dough and sourdough and things like that, that variations of this yeast are very useful for food production and help make bread rise and all of that. Okay, so they're examples of fungi. Then we come to protists. So protists is a really diverse kind of group. So it's its own kingdom, but it's a kingdom of things that kind of don't fit anywhere else. You know, bacteria kind of are within the Monera. You know, we have fungi and protists. It's kind of things that don't really fit in every other category, and so that their features are very, there's a great variety. They live in water or areas of high moisture because that helps to keep them alive. They have a more complicated cell structure than bacteria do. You know, they have a nucleus, they have other kind of organelles. This one over here, for example, is called euglena. Now, one of the things about euglena and other ones like it is that it contains chlorophyll in these chloroplasts, so it can actually undergo photosynthesis to make its own food, whereas others, like this one's called paramecium, and this one's called amoeba. that those ones don't have that same capability. Okay, so they kind of, their features are really more different and varied than in a lot of other areas of the different kingdoms. And then we come lastly to viruses. Now, viruses is actually a bit of an interesting thing to include here. I'm including them because they are very real. They can cause disease. They have harmful effects. They're kind of parasites in scientific terms. But the reason it's a bit controversial is that viruses are considered to be non-living. The reason we consider them to be non-living is they're actually smaller than a full cell. Here's a diagram of one type of virus. That the idea is that it doesn't actually have all the functions of a cell. It's a piece less than a cell. It's got some little bit of coding instructions and then kind of this little capsule kind of protective stuff that helps to surround it and allow it to enter other cells. The only way that a virus survives is using host cells. So it hijacks another cell, injects itself into it, forces the cell to become a little virus factory, make more copies of the virus, which then burst out of the cell, killing it, and causing more virus particles to be able to spread throughout your system. That's how you get a little bit of you get the cold virus and you end up with the symptoms of a full-blown cold. And it also means that viruses can be very easily passed from person to person and make people sick. So examples like influenza for the flu, the Ebola virus, or HIV, which can cause AIDS, the condition you may have heard of. And so they are examples of microorganisms, but we don't really consider them to be living. Okay, so we introduced what we mean by microorganisms, living things that are small enough that you need a microscope to see them. And then we looked at the 4 kind of categories of microorganisms, so bacteria, fungi, protists, and viruses. All right, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye for now.